Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we're taking a look at Mollustrious Brood. This is a art book of monsters by Scrap World, aka Scrap Princess. Now this is a book that focuses on the art of monsters, taking a number of classic D&D creatures and doing a bunch of different interpretations of them using Scrap's style. Now, I've been a huge fan of Scrap's artwork for a very long time, probably about 10 years or so, since I last reviewed Fire on the Velvet Horizon, which is actually my favorite monster manual. I did a review of this a long time ago. Maybe I'll take another flip through it at the end of this video, because I don't think a lot of people saw that one originally. But although I am a big fan of Scrap's work, it is very divisive, very polarizing in the RPG and OSR world. It's very scribbly, it's very visceral, it is not very detailed and realistic in the sense of fantasy realism that you tend to see in 5e books or in standard Wizards books. Before we take a look inside, though, a quick reminder that anyone who is subscribed to the Questing Beast newsletter will be in the running for a copy of the Tasks of Tantalon, an incredible puzzle book by Steve Jackson that's getting a bit hard to find these days and has a lot of stuff you can steal for your D&D games. So anyone who is in the newsletter is in the running to get it at the end of June. Here's our title page, and it has a quote from Hesiod. Echidna, who is half a nymph with glancing eyes and fair cheeks, and half again a huge snake, great and awful, with speckled skin, eating raw flesh beneath the secret parts of the holy earth. And there she has a cave deep down under a hollow rock, far from the deathless gods and mortal men. There, then did the gods appoint her a glorious house to dwell in. And she keeps guard in Arama, beneath the earth, grim Echidna, a nymph who dies not, nor grows old all her days. So here's the different types of monsters that the book is going to cover. We have air elementals or sylphs, basilisk and cockatrice, cataware, dragon, earth elemental, eye tyrant, fire elemental, hag, manticore, ogre, orc, and water elemental. And there's a number of different takes on each of those. There is some collage style artwork, but most of it is all hand drawn and hand painted. I think Scrap said he did it on big tiles and then had to photocopy them. Basilisk and cockatrice. What does it say here? Poison will have its king. An unnatural joining of common yet deeply suspicious animals. Snake, toad, chicken, all very familiar to folk magic. Birthed wrong, the deepest of sick. And the cockatrice is actually one of my favorite medieval monsters, along with the questing beast, of course. These are such great pictures of cockatrices. I love this one. One of the things you hear about Scrap's art pretty frequently is, oh, I could do that. It's just a bunch of scribbles. But then, of course, if you try and draw your own scribble monster, it's not going to look half as expressive or as interesting. These monsters are just a ton of fun to look at. Despite often being fairly simple in their basic shapes, they have so much personality. The next one is the cataware, which is Scrap's version of the displacer beast. Just look at this guy. Look at this cute little guy. One funny thing about Scrap's art is that despite being, very visceral and dark and mean looking, there's often a sense of humor with all of these creatures. Look at this. I love how his face is just kind of smeared sideways off the page. That is just a lot of fun. Next is dragons, the biggest bastard in the map. Horns, wings and scales, teeth and claws, an excess horde of animal grandeur. Fat worm, a mad toad, a great lizard, a snake twisting in black water, poison and flame. Fearful tales of crocodiles, deep water serpents, and the biggest gore-slicked beasts. Atop it all, like a gloating crown, a man's mind of willful sin. A number of really great interpretations of dragons right here. I like how this one has an almost like pelican-like gullet, where it could swallow huge things and hold it in its craw. Some of these have almost a bird-like aspect to them, and other ones look very wormy and very scary. Next is gnomes. Caves are alien places with alien things and alien ways. Weird little men here, sitting in the gray. You walk in their realm. If you breach their strange customs, they'll see you never walk out again. These are definitely like earth elementals. Blocky men, almost like the heads on Easter Island in some ways. Rather than funny little guys with hats, it gives them more character. Eye tyrants, of course, are one version of the classic beholder. The gaze has power, the evil eye, a freezing stare, a baleful glare. Maybe this is why an eyeball with eyeballs is such an instant classic. There's an absurdity here, too, that gives it some real mimetic juice. It might be the deranged, toothy smile that really completes it, though. A floating eye is just spooky, a floating eye that goes on megalomaniac rants as it blasts you while chunks of half-chewed meat tumble from its shark maw. Well, that's pure pulp-back gold. And these are some great beholders. What I love is the way that it focuses on that central eye as its main character instead of the eye stalks or things like that. Because the central eye in classic D&D is, if I remember correctly, the eye that creates the anti-magic field and is presented as this giant gaping void. Here's a few more. Man, I love these. These are so great. Especially if someone has never encountered a beholder before, you open up a page like this and say, this is what you're facing down. They're faced with more of the, eldritch horror, the unknowable abomination that is a beholder. Next is salamanders. I went with and stayed with some goofy lizards here. Look at these guys. They're almost like little dogs. They're so happy. These big, long, zipper-like mouths with tons of tiny little teeth. He's just a squiggle of fire writhing towards you. These ones are really great too. Next is hags. All monsters come from fear. Hags are fear for the old, fear of getting old, fear of the ugly, fear of getting ugly, fear of any avenue of power the ugly and old might still have. More defensible fears lurk here too, of heath tyrants, venom mothers, death grip elders, the crooked nail drawn slowly along a baby's cheek. And these are some hags that really evoke the kind of horror from movies like The Witch, if you've seen that. Just this unnameable thing living in the woods, soaked in blood, just taking life as it chooses. We have manticores, too many teeth, poison bolts to claim you before its jaws find you. The jackal schemes, the lion stink, gnawing in the dark. The voraciousness of the wilderness beast, the great maw of the desert, the life, the flesh, the bone, the land, eaten all. They're so much fun. Love his big spiky tail. Eating a guy over there. They feel so much more menacing than the kind of realistic classic portrayals that you find in TSR and wizard stuff, where it's just trying to show you this is what the monster looks like, rather than trying to evoke the feeling of encountering the monster or what the monster might symbolize. For example, the ogre might represent the bad man, the evil father, the male in the wilderness, rank hair and ill-grown muscle, a glutton and oath, a lumbering goon, a wit for only greed and pain. And that's conveyed really well here. In terms of it being a kind of troglodyte-like creature from deep underground, perhaps it represents the horror of what you might become if you no longer controlled your most base instincts. These huge mouths with giant slab-like teeth, where it's clear that the only purpose of this creature is to consume. Now, for the orcs, there's some really interesting takes on this, where I feel it refers back to the almost Tolkien-esque version of the orc, where an orc is kind of modeled after the horrors of World War I. Some people will become monsters from their fear of monsters. Some people will make up monsters so they can be them too. The infectious glee in wanton depravity, knives taken to the already dead, the smiling faces in war crime photography, the drum beats forever. These versions of orcs often have gas masks, and they seem to have machine guns of one sort or another. They are the soldiers on the battlefield who have given themselves over to war. They've become part of a machine for killing, and it's become all that they are now. Last of all, we have undines, which are water elementals, and it feels like these would fit in very well with settings like Hot Springs Island, which has a lot of undines in them. I don't think they're called undines. It's something very similar to that. And there we go. That is the end of our art book. It's really interesting to take the artwork from Illustrious Brood and compare it against the art in Fire on the Velvet Horizon, which, as I said before, is my favorite monster manual. And the art style is a little bit different. That's not too surprising. This was 10 years ago, so an artist's style is going to evolve over time. This is a little bit more scribbly, a little bit more line-focused, I feel like. Hard to put it in words. I'm not exactly an artist. So this book actually has 50 completely new monsters. And what's great is it has these detailed write-ups by Patrick Stewart, who worked on Veins of the Earth, which also has 50 monsters illustrated by Scrap. And how this worked was that Scrap just sent Patrick each of these illustrations one at a time, and Patrick wrote up a whole description and a whole lore and connecting it to an implied world just based on the art. In my opinion, it is one of the best works of OSR world building that I have ever read. It's absolutely mind-blowing. I remember reading this for the first time, and whenever I read it, I could only get through a couple monsters at a time, and then I would have to just sit down and try and process what I had read because there was so many good ideas packed into every single one of them. If the monsters in your game feel like they're getting stale, you can just flip to a random page in Fire on the Velvet Horizon and just get inspired with what is possible when it comes to fantasy monsters. Now right here we have Veins of the Earth, which is also one of my favorite RPG books of all time. And this one is also full of scrap art, but it is all done in black and white for the most part with some very limited patches of color. And just like Fire on the Velvet Horizon, this is an absolute masterclass in creating interesting monsters. Scrap style of art works particularly well here because this entire setting is underground. And so the art style looks like the creatures are barely emerging from the gloom because a lot of the time you're just in the pitch blackness or with a tiny dim light. So you can see these shapes barely emerging from the darkness heading straight towards you. I thought it was just the perfect way to evoke the claustrophobia and the terror of crawling through these black passages deep underground. Now, unfortunately, this book is very out of print and hard to find, but there is a new edition of it that is in the works. At least that's what I see from looking at Patrick Stewart's blog. So hopefully this will be available to people again sometime in the next couple years with any luck. Now, Scrap isn't just a 2D artist. He also does three-dimensional sculptures, like this horrible little frog guy that I bought from him. It's really neat to see what Scrap's imagination looks like in more than 2 dimensions. And now I have a little monster I can plop down on the table to horrify my players. Although, like I said, there is, I feel like, a sense of humor about all of these creatures. It's a horrible, mutated little frog monster, but he's not such a bad guy. Scrap also sent me this horrible little pig creature as well, so now a frog dude has a friend. Well, there's my look at Mollustrious Brood and some of Scrap's other artwork. And like I said, it's a very divisive style of art, and you'll likely know which side of that divide you're on right after watching this video. Either you see the monsters in this book and you think, wow, those are some of the coolest monsters I've ever seen, or that is absolutely not for me. For me, looking at a lot of Scrap's art activates creative and imaginative parts of my brain that simply do not get activated when I look at a standard Wizards of the Coast monster. For example, here's what the different elemental monsters look like in the official D&D monster manual. Here's what the fire elementals look like. Compare that to the salamanders that we saw in this book. Or here's an official portrayal of an orc. Is it more detailed and realistic than the ones in Mollustrious Brood? Sure. But does it evoke any emotions in you? Does it make you want to play with it and put it into your games? For me, it doesn't. When you look at Scrap's monsters, you don't see a bag of hit points with some special abilities to fight. You see something more primal. You see some psychic shape of a monster that's been dragged out of the human subconscious and exposed for you to look at. They break down my inherent notions of what monsters look like in D&D and really fire up my imagination to go in a completely different direction. Also, I just think that they are a ton of fun to look at. In any case, if you want to pick up any of Scrap's books or even any of the little monsters that he makes periodically, I will have links to all of his stuff down in the comments below for where you can check it out for yourself. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.